The herbs she needed only grew near the boundary marker. Naya had known this before she left the village. She had weighed it on the walk out, the usefulness of what grew near the border against the risk of being near the border at all. And the herbs had won, because that was the kind of calculation she still made. She crossed the second ridge. She found the plants. She filled the bottom third of her bag and turned to leave. That was when she heard the horses. 4 of them, coming over the eastern rise at a purposeful trot. Royal colors, dark wool, gold stitching at the collar, the kind of livery that cost more than the men wearing it earned in a month. She set her bag down, straightened, and kept her hands where they could be seen. She did not run. She had made that mistake once, 3 years ago, when it mattered, and it had not saved anyone. She had no interest in repeating it now for a handful of herbs. Omega. The lead rider stopped 10 feet away. His eyes moved from her bare hands to her bag, to the carved boundary post at her back. This is Crown property. I know. Then you know the penalty. I do. He studied her for a moment. Whatever he was looking for, the absence of it seemed to settle the question. He dismounted and pulled a short length of iron chain from his saddle pack. Hands forward. The shackles were too large. She could feel the extra space at every step the horse took, the iron shifting before catching. They rode through the morning and into the afternoon, and she stopped hearing the rattle after the first hour. The road climbed through open country, low hills, pale rock, the kind of land nobody had ever bothered to name or fight over because there was nothing in it worth the trouble. She knew this type of land well. She had lived its margins for 3 years, moving between the small villages that clung to the edges of it, working as the person who knew which plants reduced fever and which ones closed wounds when the nearest proper healer was half a day's ride in any direction. She was careful about how much she offered, useful enough to be kept, not so visible that anyone looked twice. She used the same herbs she gathered today to manage what her blood and her instincts broadcast without her permission, to make herself read as ordinary to anyone passing close enough to notice. It had worked well, until today. The bag they had taken from her sat tied to the lead rider's saddle. Most of what was in it would be thrown away by nightfall. She watched it from her horse and decided this was not worth additional feeling. Greywall appeared in the late afternoon, sitting against the sky on a cut of high rock. She had heard the name before. Everyone in the territory heard it eventually. It was the kind of name that surfaced in conversations about things going wrong, about decisions made far away that arrived as consequence. She had imagined something more imposing. What she saw instead was a fortress built for function, with no interest in appearance. Walls thick and dark, towers at each corner, arrow slits instead of windows, stone that had been chosen for density rather than beauty. It looked like something designed to outlast everything around it. The gates opened before the riders reached them. Someone on the walls had been watching the road. The courtyard inside was large and organized with military precision. Training grounds to the east, weapons racked at the far wall. Stables to the west, horses moving in the half-light of the open doors. A stone well at the center, its lip worn smooth by years of daily use. A dozen guards at intervals straightened as the riders came through, the automatic adjustment of people who knew they were being observed. They placed her in the center of the courtyard and left her standing. She waited. The light moved from amber to gray, and the cold came off the stone walls and settled into her back. The guards stopped pretending not to watch her and simply watched. She kept her gaze on the ground between her feet and breathed steadily. Her wolf lay coiled somewhere deep in her chest, as it had for 3 years. Not absent, but still. She felt it the way she felt the space where a back tooth had been when she was 12, the absence that had its own specific shape. Occasionally it moved. Occasionally something reached it, some scent or sound it had catalogued from another life, and it would shift slightly before going still again. She had learned not to reach for it when it moved. Reaching never helped. Then the main door opened at the top of the steps. The change in the courtyard was immediate and wordless. Not visible, no one moved, no one spoke. But the quality of attention shifted, the way a room changes when something that expects deference walks into it. She had grown up around that feeling. She had lived with it for years in a different place, with a different man. And her body remembered it the way the body remembers things the mind would rather set aside. She raised her eyes. He came down the steps without any urgency, dark hair to the jaw, pushed back from his face. A short beard, close kept, broad through the shoulders in a way that wasn't about the coat he wore. He moved without performing it, which was the particular quality of people who didn't need to. His eyes found her before anything else did, and they were dark amber, the color of resin, patient and opaque. She put his age at no more than 30, younger than she would have expected for a man who had spent 3 years reordering the world. One of the guards stepped forward and extended a folded document. Omega, no pack registration. Found on Crown territory near the Caldfen boundary. No provocation offered, but the border breach is clear. He took the document without looking at the guard. He read. His expression did not change. Your name, he said. His voice carried without effort. Naya. Pack. She said nothing. He looked up from the document. It's a simple question. You already know the answer. It's why I'm here. Something moved at the edge of his jaw, the compression of a reaction rather than the expression of one. He folded the document once and held it at his side. The penalty for an unregistered Omega on Crown territory is execution. You understand that? Yes. And you have nothing to offer in response? No. He looked at her the way she had seen careful people look at things they couldn't immediately categorize. Not with hostility, with attention. His gaze moved from her face to her shackled hands, to the bag that had been taken from her and dropped near the well, then back to her face. He raised his hand. A small gesture, almost casual, 2 fingers lifted. At the far edge of the courtyard, the executioner straightened. Merrick spoke the formal words. She knew them. She had heard fragments of them once before, in pieces, through smoke and the sound of running feet, on the worst night of her life. She had sometimes wondered what the whole of them sounded like. Now she knew. And she laughed. It came without warning, short and quiet and entirely involuntary, the sound that escapes when something settles into place exactly as absurd as you always suspected it would. 3 years of mornings without a reason to leave the straw mat, and today was going to end over a boundary post and a bag of herbs. The courtyard stopped. Merrick's hand was still raised. He had stopped speaking, and he was looking at her with an expression she did not have a word for. Not anger, not surprise. Something that had more age to it than either of those. The executioner had not moved. The guards had not moved. Nobody in that yard made a sound. She did not look away. There was no particular reason to. He lowered his hand. Take her to the North Tower. The guard at her left hesitated. My lord, the protocol requires, has been heard. His voice was flat. North Tower. No one argued further. The executioner stood for a moment without purpose, then stepped back and became part of the wall again. The guard took her arm, careful now, uncertain of what she had become in the last 30 seconds, and turned her toward the interior door. She moved with him. At the edge of her vision, near the arch that led into the inner corridor, a figure stood apart from the guards. Tall, fair-haired, pale-eyed, watching with the unhurried attention of someone who watched everything as a habitual practice. He had not been standing there when she arrived. She did not know when he had appeared. There was nothing in his expression she could identify as a specific threat. There was nothing she could identify as safe either. She looked ahead and let the guard walk her through the door. The North Tower room had a cot, a table, a stool, and a window. Naya stood in front of the window. It was small, an iron bar crossing the center, no glass, barely wide enough to put her hand through. But it faced east, and through it she could see the dark line of the ridge against the sky, a strip of forest at its base, and above that, the first stars appearing where the daylight had thinned. A window was not an accident. She had spent 3 years living in places that housed people nobody cared about, and none of them had windows that faced anywhere worth seeing. Stone walls this thick did not develop them on their own. Someone had made a decision. She sat on the cot and pulled the blanket over her shoulders. The cold that had settled in her chest had nothing to do with the temperature. Her wolf lay still, the way it had been still since the night Ashvale burned, present as an outline, a held shape, warmth that had stopped moving. On the road to Greywall, it had stirred once. A single pulse, deep and brief, there and then absent. She had noticed it, and then it had gone quiet again, and she had let it go, the way she let most things go now. She did not think about why she laughed. She already knew why. What she turned over in the silence was the moment after. The hand stopped mid-gesture, the courtyard holding its breath, the expression on his face that she couldn't name. Not shock, not offense. Something that had looked, for a moment, almost like recognition, though that made no sense. He had never seen her before. She was nobody. She was an unregistered Omega who had walked onto the wrong side of a boundary post. She had expected the order to finish anyway. Ceremony carried its own weight. You began something like that, and it wanted to complete itself. He had stopped it. Outside, the fortress moved into its evening, the rhythm of boots on stone stairs, a door closing somewhere below, heavy iron on heavy stone. The low exchange of voices at the watch change, words she couldn't make out, tone she could, routine, tired, ordinary. She had been certain this morning was the last one. She pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the star in the window and stayed with that fact until it stopped feeling like a problem that needed solving. Below the certainty, underneath it, something small and stubborn sat in her chest next to the stillness of her wolf. She did not look at it directly. She had learned in 3 years that looking at things directly was how they grew larger than you were prepared for. She lay down and closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but eventually she did. He came back the following evening. No announcement, no guard escort, just the sound of the door at the base of the stairs and then his steps coming up. Unhurried. The particular weight of a man who had never learned to move quietly because he had never needed to. He brought a stool. He set it outside the cell door, sat down, and rested his forearms on his knees. "You haven't eaten," he said. The tray from the morning sat untouched at the corner of the cot. She had looked at it. She had not been hungry. "No." "Are you unwell?" "No." He looked at the tray, then at her. "Then eat it." She picked up the bread. She ate slowly, without ceremony, while he watched. When she finished, she set the crust down and looked back at him. "Satisfied?" she asked. "Not particularly." He stayed for another hour. He asked where she had traveled, how long, what she knew about the villages near the Kaldfen boundary. She answered the ones that didn't matter. He listened, the way people listen when they are not looking for a specific answer, taking the measure of the person speaking instead. She answered. He listened. He left. He came back the night after that, and the night after that. By the end of the first week, she had stopped being surprised by the stool appearing outside the door. The questions changed. Early on, they had been practical. Territory, movement, contacts. By the 5th night, they had drifted somewhere else. What she knew about plant medicine, how she had learned it, how long she had been working in the villages. He didn't ask about her pack. He had asked once in the courtyard, and she hadn't answered, and he had not asked again. She noticed that. She answered more than she intended to, most nights. Not because she trusted him, and not because she was trying to manage him. It was simpler and more irritating than either of those. His questions were frequently interesting, and she had spent 3 years talking to people who mostly needed her useful, not present. "You travel alone," he said on the 6th night. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "For 3 years." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. His hands rested loosely between his knees, and he turned the signet ring on his right hand once, a single slow rotation, before he stopped. She filed that away, a habit he probably didn't know he had. "That's a long time," he said. "It is." "And before that?" She looked at him. He waited without pressing, which was more patience than she had expected from him. "Before that, I was somewhere else," she said. He didn't push further. He stayed another half hour. When he left, the stool scraped against the stone, and his footsteps went down the stairs, and the door at the bottom closed, and she lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. She had been aware of every hour between his leaving and his returning since the 3rd night. She would have preferred not to know that about herself. Her wolf was not dead. She had known this the way she knew the shapes of things she could not look at directly. It lay quiet in the deepest part of her, A stillness that had its own weight, its own specific texture. 3 years of deliberate distance from anything that might wake it. No packs, no wolves, no territory she had once known, no scent that carried a life that no longer existed. She had built the quiet with intention. She had maintained it the same way. On the 8th night, Merrick settled on the stool outside her door, and her wolf moved. Not a surge, not a rise toward the surface. A shift in orientation, the way something turns toward a sound it recognizes too faintly to name. There and then absent, quick enough that she could almost convince herself it hadn't happened. She pressed it back down with the same deliberate attention she had practiced for 3 years. She kept her face even. "Cold tonight," he said. "Yes." He let the silence sit for a moment. She had learned by the 8th night that he did this. Let silence occupy a space rather than filling it, as if silence was something to be used instead of endured. "There's a fever moving through the East Barracks," he said eventually. "Started 4 days ago. 12 men as of this morning." She considered this. "What kind of fever?" "Runs high. Doesn't respond to what the healer gives it." "Do they have cough with it?" He looked at her in the particular way he had. Not warmth, not surprise. Assessment. Both heat and cough. "Yes." "What's the healer giving them?" "Willow bark. Cool water." She said nothing. She already knew what the healer wasn't giving them. "You know something," he said. "I know what works in the villages." He was still watching her face. The villages being where your practical education comes from, among other places. The ring turned once on his finger, stopped. "I'll have you brought to the infirmary in the morning," he said. "You'll work alongside the healer. And if he objects, he'll manage." She did not point out that this was a substantial expansion of what her current situation permitted. She had learned, in a previous life, that you did not ask for accounting on things already moving in your direction. "All right," she said. He left earlier than usual. She lay on the cot and catalogued what she would need from the supply room and tried to think only about that. The healer's name was Pell. Older, deliberate, the kind of man who had been doing the same work for so long that alternatives had ceased to exist for him. He received her with the specific courtesy extended to inconveniences one has been ordered to tolerate, showed her the supply room without explaining anything in it, and returned to his patients. She found what she needed without asking. Red bark, dried. Fever root near the back of the second shelf, slightly stale but still viable. She worked it into a preparation with hot water and waited for it to cool. The first man she gave it to looked at the cup, then at her. "What is it?" "Something that should help. Drink it slowly." He drank it in 2 long pulls and handed the cup back and said nothing further. She moved to the next cot. She worked through the morning. Pell watched her at intervals without commenting. By midday, 2 of the 3 men she had treated in the first hours had stopped shaking. The fever was still present, but beginning to move, which was entirely different from the stasis it had been locked in. She was adjusting the blanket on the 4th man when she became aware of someone standing in the doorway. She finished what she was doing before she turned. Merrick stood with his arms crossed, shoulder against the frame. He was not looking at the room. He was looking at her, the same quality of attention she had felt through the cell bars, but wider now, less contained. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to her patient. "His name is Ryden," she said to the man in the cot. "Tell Pell so the doses don't get confused." She moved to the next cot. She did not look at the door again. She heard Merrick's footsteps leave before she reached the end of the row. Her wolf had shifted the entire time he was in the doorway. Not strongly, not in any way she couldn't control, but steadily, persistently, like something leaning into a direction without yet knowing why. She stood between 2 cots in the infirmary and pressed it down until the sensation passed, and she continued with her work. 2 days after she started in the infirmary, the sick count stopped climbing. Pell confirmed this without looking at her, adjusting instruments on his workbench while he spoke, as if providing her with information was a task he was completing rather than a conversation he was having. She said nothing in return. She cleaned the cups from the morning round. The access had expanded without discussion. Supply room. The corridor connecting the infirmary to the east courtyard. Small extensions, one after another, which she noted and did not comment on. She understood who was making these decisions, and she understood that acknowledging them openly would change their nature. On the third afternoon, she encountered Soren in the corridor. She recognized him before he reached her, the man from the arch on the evening she arrived. The one who had stood apart from the guards with the unhurried attention of someone who catalogued everything as a matter of routine. She had not seen him in the days since. He walked now as though he owned the route and everyone currently on it. "You've been useful," he said. Flat, factual, the word carrying no warmth inside it. "The men are improving. Several of them. Yes." He stopped at a distance that was neither close nor far, precisely calibrated. "How long have you been practicing? A few years?" "In the outer villages." "Yes." He studied her with pale eyes that moved methodically from her face to her hands, to the corridor behind her and back. She looked back without flinching and without offering anything further. "You must have been trained somewhere," he said. "You learn what you need to." A pause small enough that someone less attentive might not have caught it. Then he nodded once and walked back the way he had come. She stood in the corridor after he had gone and let the quiet settle around her. The exchange had been entirely ordinary. Polite, brief, professionally curious. There had been nothing in it she could point to as a specific threat. That was exactly what stayed with her. She returned to the infirmary and said nothing about it to anyone. On the 14th night, Merrick did not come. She stayed on the cot and told herself it was not anything. One evening. He had a fortress to run and decisions that had nothing to do with a stool outside a cell door on a particular schedule. The North Tower was part of his fortress. These visits were not a pattern. They were interrogation, ongoing, and some nights interrogation did not occur. She was still awake well past the second bell when she heard the door at the base of the stairs. His steps came up. The stool scraped into place. "Paperwork," he said, before she could speak. As if she had asked. She sat up. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." She looked at him. The amber of his eyes caught the low torchlight from the corridor. Something present in them she had no clean word for. An orientation she recognized only because she had seen something like it before, in a different place, on a different man, in a life that no longer existed. She looked away. "The men in the South Barracks are showing early signs," she said. "I told Pell this morning." And he listened the way he listens to things he's already decided to ignore. "I'll speak to him." "You don't have to speak to him. You have to tell him." The corner of his mouth moved, brief, almost nothing, and then gone. "I'll tell him." The wind outside pressed steadily against the east wall. She could hear it through the window bar, low and persistent, the sound of weather that had somewhere else to be and had not arrived there yet. "Why do you come here?" she asked. "Information. You haven't asked for territory information in 8 days." He said nothing. "I'm not complaining," she said. "I'm asking." He looked at her for a long moment. The ring turned once on his finger and was still. "I don't know," he said. The 3 words sat differently than anything else he had said across 14 evenings. Not a deflection, not a strategy. Something accurate that he had apparently decided to say instead of something manageable. She looked at the shadow the window bar made across the stone floor and let the answer stay exactly where he had left it. "Tell Pell before morning," she said. "I will." He stayed another hour. After he left, she remained sitting with her back to the wall, her knees pulled up, and she stayed with the particular quality of that silence. The kind that follows a conversation that has said more than either person intended. Her wolf lay still in her chest, the way it always did. But it was turned, she realized, in a specific direction. It had been turned that direction for several nights. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and held it there, and she breathed, and eventually she lay down. Outside, the wind worked at the stone. Below, the fortress made its ordinary sounds. She stared at the ceiling and told herself, with less conviction than she would have liked, that this was not a problem yet. It was already a problem. The order came 3 mornings after the South Barracks incident. A rider in from the Eastern Pass with a sealed dispatch that Merrick read at the morning table and set face down without comment. Naya heard about it from the soldier whose arm she was rebandaging in the infirmary. He had the kind of mouth that moved faster than his sense of discretion could manage, which she had found useful since the first day. "Dunvale," he said. craning to see over his shoulder as she worked. Border dispute with Lord Davin's men. The king goes himself when it's complicated enough. She tied the bandage and told him to keep it clean. By midday, Merrick appeared in the infirmary doorway. "I'm leaving for Dunvale at first light," he said. 2 days' ride. Sergeant Harwell is coming with the delegation. He took an arrow to the thigh 6 weeks ago. Riding will aggravate it, and I need him functional on arrival. She looked up from the preparation she was measuring. "You want me to travel with you. I want Harwell to arrive able to stand. You'll ride with the delegation." She thought about the cell in the North Tower. She thought about Soren and his pale, cataloging eyes, and the corridor where he had asked her how long she had been practicing. "All right," she said. He was already turning to leave. "What should I bring?" He paused. "Whatever you need for the sergeant's leg." He left. She turned back to her preparation and measured with more care than the task required. They rode out at dawn, 12 riders, Harwell on a thick-boned horse that tolerated his shifting weight without complaint. Naya rode toward the middle of the column, between 2 guards who had not been asked their opinion on the arrangement. The road east climbed through pale rock country before dropping into lower ground, wider valleys, more water, land that had supported settlements long enough that the settlements had started to look permanent. Villages sat at intervals, well tended in the specific way of places that had been rebuilt rather than simply maintained. She noticed the gaps between old stone and new mortar, the places where walls had been repaired in a different color than what surrounded them. She noticed the crosses in the earth at the south end of the second village, neat rows set back from the road at a distance that meant someone had made a deliberate decision about how close they should sit to things the living used daily. Merrick rode at the front. At the midday rest, he pulled his horse alongside hers without ceremony. "How is the sergeant's leg?" "Holding. The cold isn't helping. He should stay off it at the first stop, full hour." Agreed. He poured water from his flask and looked at the road ahead. "We'll make the valley in by dark." She looked at the rebuilt wall of a farmhouse to their left. The new stone was pale and clean against the weathered gray surrounding it. "How many settlements in this stretch?" she asked. He glanced at her. 7. 3 were resettled after the campaign. 4 stayed. She heard the word for what it was. Stayed. The packs that accepted the transition kept their land. The ones that didn't lost it. People were displaced and settled elsewhere. And the ones who couldn't be displaced? He was quiet for a moment. Thinking for accuracy, she recognized that in him now. "There were casualties," he said. "The campaign lasted 4 months. Not all of those were combat." She looked at the road and said nothing further. He rode back to the front of the column. The Valley Inn was large enough to quarter the delegation with room to spare. She checked Harwell's leg by firelight, replaced the dressing, told him he could ride tomorrow if he kept the weight forward on the stirrup. He thanked her in the direct way soldiers thanked healers, brief and genuine, no excess. She ate alone at the end of the long table. The delegation talked around her, over her. She listened without appearing to. Dunvale, Lord Davin. A territorial line that had shifted twice in 6 months. The kind of dispute that required a king rather than a letter, because letters left records both sides could reinterpret. Merrick sat at the head of the table. He was not loud at dinner. His eyes moved to her once, briefly, and she was looking at her cup when they did. She had been looking at her cup because she had seen them coming. Her wolf had shifted when he sat down at the far end of the table. As it had been shifting, with increasing frequency for 2 weeks, not strongly, nothing she couldn't hold, but turned. Oriented in a specific direction. She managed it the way she managed everything she had no clean answer for. Deliberate attention, and then food she didn't particularly want, and then sleep. Dunvale sat where 2 roads met a river, the kind of geography that made disputes inevitable. The Lord's Hall was modest. They arrived mid-morning. The local lord met them at the gate with the nervous energy of a man who had spent 3 days calculating what the Alpha King's visit meant for him personally. Merrick dismounted, shook the man's hand, and went inside. Harwell could walk on his own, which Naya noted with quiet satisfaction. She told him to find her if it worsened, and followed the delegation's servant to a room near the back of the hall. She sat on the bed for a moment and let the motion of the road leave her body. Then she thought about what the soldier at the inn had said. All the records in this region. The campaign. Everything deposited here when it ended. She sat with that thought for a measured time. Then she picked up her bag and went looking for the archive room. It was not difficult to find. The hall was not large, and the door with the heavier iron lock, set into older stone at the north end of the ground floor, was distinct from every other door. She asked a servant. She was the healer. Healers sometimes needed supply records. The archive held all kinds of records. She was directed without suspicion. A young clerk sat at a desk inside, copying figures from one ledger to another. He looked up. "Can I help you? I'm looking for any record of healer's supplies from the campaign period. Old stock? Anything still viable?" He waved a hand at the rows behind him. "Campaign materials are at the back. 3 years old, not organized." He returned to his copying. She went to the back. He was correct about the organization. Boxes stacked without labels, ledgers shelved spines inward, bundles tied with cord that had dried and half-rotted. Someone had moved everything here in bulk and closed the door behind them. She worked through the first 2 boxes: requisition orders, supply manifests, standard campaign material. The 3rd box had territorial dissolution records near the bottom. She did not know that was what they were until she was halfway through. Then the format changed. A different header, a different seal. Crown Authority, dissolution orders, one after another, each with a territory name, a date, a confirmation signature. She found it on the 7th page. Ashvale. The order read, Territory of Ashvale, Pack Dissolution, Effective Immediate. Method, dispersal of pack members to authorized resettlement zones. Alpha to be removed from position and escorted to the Eastern Holding. At the bottom, authorized by Alpha King Merrick. Signed and sealed. She kept reading. The field report attached below carried Soren's signature. She had seen that signature once before, on a supply approval in the Grey Wall corridor, and she recognized the particular way he formed the first letter. The field report contained 2 things that did not match the order above it. The first was the numbers. 47 pack members listed as departed for resettlement. She had known Ashvale's count at the time, 73 adults, 21 children. The page accounted for 68. The remaining 26 sat under a separate column with one word, resolved. She read that word 3 times. The second was a single added paragraph placed before the report's main body. It stated that the Alpha of Ashvale had been neutralized prior to the commencement of operations by order of the General, due to intelligence indicating imminent threat to Crown forces. Bram's name was not written there. She did not need it to be. She sat with the documents on her knees and looked at the stone floor. The clerk's quill scratched at the front of the room. There was no imminent threat. Bram would not have organized one. She knew exactly what kind of man he was. Careful. Measured. Someone who believed that survival was worth compromise in the short term, that you held people together by bending before you broke. He would have accepted the dispersal. He would have argued against it first, and then accepted it, and spent the years after finding ways to keep those people connected, even scattered. He had not been a threat to anyone's forces. He had known something. She turned back through the pages. Soren had controlled the field operation. He had sent one paragraph to the Crown Record claiming Bram was a threat, and no one had asked him to specify the nature of that threat, because no one had reason to question it. Near the bottom of the box, a meeting record surfaced. Brief. Noting that General Soren had conducted diplomatic outreach with Lord Davin's representative during the second week of campaign operations to discuss post-unification territorial arrangements. The language was vague in the way of documents written to record without disclosing. She did not know what it meant. Not yet. She folded the field report. She folded the dissolution order. She put them in the bottom of her herb bag, beneath the dried bark and the folded cloth. She straightened the remaining documents, placed the box back where she had found it, and walked to the front of the room. "Nothing useful," she said to the clerk. "Mostly old requisitions." He glanced up without interest. "Told you." She walked back to her room. She sat on the bed and did not move for a long time. She had built 3 years of distance from the night Ashvale burned. Not forgetting. She had never been interested in forgetting, which was a fiction people comforted themselves with. But distance. The specific geography of grief that places the thing that broke you far enough back that it stays contained. The documents in her bag had removed that distance in 4 minutes. She thought about Bram, not the absence of him, which was the shape she had learned to live around, but him. His voice. The particular way he stood when he was thinking. The nights in the hall, with maps and quiet plans, building something piece by piece. She thought about what she had been carrying when she ran through the trees with fire behind her. What she had still been running toward in those first hours. Intact, still possible. The week after, when it had become clear it was not going to remain intact. The silence of that particular morning. The specific weight of understanding that the child was gone too. That the fire had taken what she had not even known yet how to protect. The anger that rose in her now was older than anything she had felt in 3 years. It had mass. It sat in her chest alongside her wolf, which had gone completely still since she opened that box, the animal quiet of something that recognizes danger before the mind can name it. And it occupied space she had kept cleared for a long time. She pressed her palm against the bag. She did not cry. She had finished crying in the first year. What remained was not the soft kind of grief. It was what grief becomes when it has been through enough time, harder and more precise, with edges. She breathed until her hands were steady. Then she went to find Harwell and check his leg for the evening. On the return ride to Greywall, Naya said little. The road was the same road. The rebuilt walls were the same rebuilt walls, and the cemeteries at the south ends of the villages were the same cemeteries. She looked at them this time without looking away. Merrick pulled alongside her once on a long, straight stretch. "How is the leg?" "Good. He should rest it when we arrive, but it held the ride." He nodded and rode with her in silence for a moment, looking ahead. The quiet between them had been workable for weeks. She had contributed to it, and he had met it, and they had both found it more honest than conversation for its own sake. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm often quiet. Not this quiet." She kept her eyes forward. Long ride. He watched her a moment longer. She felt it without turning. Then he moved back to the front of the column and stayed there until Greywall appeared on the horizon, dark and solid against the fading afternoon sky. She was back in the North Tower cell by nightfall. The bag sat on the table. She left it there. She sat on the cot and looked at the strip of dark sky above the ridge through the window bar and turned the problem over in her mind the way she turned problems she had no immediate answer for. Not looking for resolution, just looking at the shape of it. Soren was here. Every day, in every corridor, in every exchange between Merrick and his council. He was the man Merrick trusted to confirm information before it became decision. She understood, clearly and without comfort, what that meant for anything she might say. When Merrick's steps came up the stairs that night and the stool scraped into place outside her door, she told him she was tired from the road. She answered his questions in short sentences. When he asked again, at the end, if something was wrong, she told him no. He stayed 40 minutes and left. She sat in the dark with the bag on her lap and her wolf gone still beneath her ribs. And she thought about Bram, and she thought about Soren's signature at the bottom of a report built on something that had never happened. And she thought about the man who had sat on the other side of those bars for 3 weeks asking her questions that were frequently interesting. He had signed a document. He had not read the field report underneath it. He had not gone to Ashvale. He had not seen the numbers that didn't close. She did not know yet what she was going to do with any of that. She knew, with complete certainty, that doing nothing was no longer possible. 3 days after their return, a soldier from the delegation found Soren in the East Corridor. The conversation lasted under 2 minutes. She was in the infirmary and did not see it. But Soren heard that the healer had spent considerable time in the Dunvale archive during the delegation's visit, and he filed that piece of information in the same methodical place where he filed everything that touched the edges of things he had worked to bury. He did not move immediately. He began, instead, to think, which was, for a man like Soren, considerably more dangerous than moving. The nights had changed since Dunvale. Not in anything Merrick could have named specifically. She was present. She answered. She did not withdraw in any way that left clear evidence. No silence long enough to be absence, no answer short enough to be refusal. But the particular quality she had brought to the bars of the cell door, the open-ended way she had sat with questions and let them run to wherever they ran, was gone. She had replaced it with something managed. He recognized managed because he had spent 12 years doing it himself. He did not ask again. He had asked twice, once on the road, once here, and twice she had said it was nothing. And he had decided that pressing would cost more than waiting. His wolf had not quieted. If anything, it had grown more insistent in the weeks since Dunvale, a persistent lean in a direction he could not locate, the animal registering something his conscious mind had no name for. He had spent enough time around his own nature to know the difference between instinct that was useful and instinct working on a frequency he hadn't learned to read yet. This was the second kind. He stayed longer at the cell door some nights. She noticed. She did not comment on it. He left, and the feeling stayed, which was its own kind of answer. The first guard was someone Soren had known for 7 years. He had not recruited the man for anything particular. Some people were simply useful in the general way, loyal to proximity rather than principle, reliable in small tasks without asking large questions. He had kept that kind of person near throughout his time at Greywall. The way a man keeps tools that serve no single purpose but seem always to be what's needed. He gave the instructions without written record, the North Tower stair and the short corridor outside her room after the second bell. The night watch rotation placed 2 of his guards on that stretch from the second bell to the 4th. An Omega without pack registration, no legal standing, no family expecting her anywhere. An accident in the dark required very little staging when no one was positioned to question it. He did not tell them what she had found. He did not know precisely what she had found. He knew she had been in that archive for the better part of an hour, and that the archive contained the Dunvale campaign records, and that those records contained field reports he had written himself. That was sufficient to act on. He went to the evening council briefing and offered an observation about the Eastern Border Patrol schedule, and listened to the responses and showed nothing on his face. Naya had spent the week since Dunvale learning the rhythms of the tower and the east corridor beyond it. She did not frame it to herself as preparation. She framed it as awareness, the same awareness she had applied for 3 years to every new place she moved through, cataloging exits and schedules and the patterns of people present by habit rather than intention. Old practice. It had nothing to do with the documents in her bag. She told herself this in the mornings. By evening, she had stopped believing it. The bag sat at the base of the cot, tucked against the wall. The documents were folded inside the cloth pouch where she kept the red bark. The last place someone doing a quick search would look, because the bark stained everything it touched for long, and most people avoided it. She had taken the bag to the infirmary each day as always. She had brought it back each night. She had not decided what to do. She was aware that not deciding was its own kind of decision, that every morning she woke still saying tomorrow she was handing Soren more time to think. She knew the shape of the problem clearly. She had turned it into different configurations for 7 days, and each arrived at the same place. There was no clean path through this. Every option required trusting someone, and the only person in this fortress she had developed any approximation of trust with was the person whose signature sat at the bottom of a dissolution order. To put the papers in Merrick's hands, she would have to move them through corridors Soren could control, and if Merrick looked at the seal on the order and chose his general over an unregistered Omega, there would be no second attempt. She would disappear, and the papers with her. On the 8th night, she blew out the candle and lay in the dark, and finally admitted she was not deciding because she was afraid of what happened after she did. The wind outside the window bar was low and persistent. The second bell had passed by the time she woke. She woke because her wolf woke first. 3 years of silence and then full attention. Immediate, absolute. The animal surfacing from whatever depth it had retreated to with complete focus. She was on her feet before she understood why. Her body responded to information the wolf had already processed, some frequency in the stone or the air or the dark beneath the door that arrived before her mind caught up. She stood in the center of the room. The lock scraped. She had a single breath between that sound and the door opening. She used it to look at the window, too small, the bar across the center, 3 floors up. She looked at the table, the stool, the empty tray from dinner. She looked at the two men coming through the door. Neither was a guard she recognized from her regular escort. Both wore guard livery. One carried a short blade. The other carried nothing visible, which was more worrying than the blade. "Stay quiet," the first one said. "It's cleaner quiet." They came at her together. She had learned, in a previous life, the basics of not dying, not fighting. She had never been built for that, and Bram had understood the difference clearly enough to teach her what was actually useful. Creating space, waiting for weight to commit before moving, not fighting a body bigger than hers, only the specific points of it. She moved away from the first man's reach and toward the wall, kept moving along it, put the table between herself and the second. The man, without the visible weapon, reached the table and shoved it sideways. It hit the wall. That was when she ran out of room. The wall at her back, both men between her and the door. Something happened in her chest. It did not feel like a decision. It felt like something that had been waiting to be pressured past a certain point, and the point had been reached, and what was on the other side of it came through whether she asked it to or not. Her wolf came up, not gradually, not the tentative lean she had been managing for weeks. The full surface of it. 3 years of absence resolving into presence in a single convulsive moment, and it brought with it everything. The shift arrived with pain that the word pain did not fully cover, every bone resisting and then yielding. And then there was no longer a woman standing in the corner of the room. The wolf that came through the shift was not calm. She had not been a wolf in 3 years, and the wolf had not forgotten, and it had not recovered from what it had lost. What came through was not the controlled emergence she had practiced in another life. It was everything she had kept compressed for 3 years, given physical form and the full use of a body that was significantly larger than the one the two men had walked in expecting to deal with. The first man ran. The second did not move fast enough. She did not kill him. That was deliberate. Some part of her still present and making choices within the animal, the same way she had always understood that the wolf was not separate from her. It was her, with different teeth. She broke his knife hand against the wall and shoved him through the doorway. He fell into the corridor and did not get back up immediately. She stood in the doorway of the cell in wolf form, and her sides were heaving, and the corridor was cold, and the torchlight moved in a draft from somewhere below, and she was shaking with something that was not fear, but lived in the same part of the body. Then she heard boots on the stairs, multiple sets, moving fast. She retreated into the room. The door at the base of the stairs hit the wall when it opened. Merrick came through first, 2 guards behind him, and he stopped at the top of the stairs with the scene in front of him. The guard down in the corridor, the broken knife against the stone, the North Tower room door open, and the large, pale gray wolf standing inside it. She watched him take it in. All of it, in sequence, the way he processed things. Not with reaction first, with attention first. His gaze moved from the downed guard to the knife, to the open door to her. His wolf knew before he did. She understood this, because she felt it. The bond that had been incomplete for weeks and was no longer, the signal her wolf had been suppressing through 3 years of silence, now resolved from both sides at once. Not gradual, not a warming toward. A closing, like a circuit completed, the specific recognition that had no analog in anything else. Because it was not an emotion. It was the animal telling the body something the body instantly understood was true. He went completely still. His guards had stopped behind him. Nobody in that corridor made a sound. She shifted back. It was harder than the shift forward. It always was when the shift had been involuntary, when the wolf did not want to yield what it had finally been given back after years without it. She was on her knees on the floor by the time it finished, braced on one arm, breathing in the way of someone who has asked their body for something twice in 3 minutes that she had not asked it for once in 3 years. When she looked up, Merrick was standing in the doorway. His attention bypassed the wreck of the room entirely and landed on her, and the expression on his face was unlike any she had seen across 6 weeks of evenings through cell bars. The patience was gone. The assessment was gone. What had replaced them was something more immediate that he was not yet managing, and he was not pretending otherwise. She looked back at him. She felt it in her chest, not loud, not overwhelming, but unmistakable. The way a sound becomes identifiable the moment you've heard its like before. Her wolf turned toward it without any hesitation at all. 3 years of absence made no difference to something that did not operate on time. This was what she had been refusing to name for weeks. He crouched down to her level. He did not reach for her. "Are you hurt?" She took stock. Her hands were shaking. Her shoulder had caught the wall during the struggle and would darken by morning. Nothing structural. No. His eyes moved to her shoulder. She watched him register the impact mark, the discoloration already forming along the ridge of it. He said nothing for a moment. Who sent them? Not a question. She met his gaze and thought about the bag at the base of the cot, about the documents inside it, about 7 days of not deciding that had brought her to a broken knife and a knocked-out guard and her knees on stone. "I don't know who those men are," she said, "but I have something you should see." She got to her feet without help. He did not offer it, and she did not want it, and that was one of many things they had understood about each other without discussion. She crossed to the cot and picked up the bag and turned back. He was standing in the center of the room now. The guards had moved the downed man out of the corridor. Below, voices spread through the night watch, the fortress adjusting to disturbance. He had not sent her away. He had not reached for the explanation that would be simplest. She held the bag in both hands. "Not here," she said. "Not tonight. When you have proper time to read what I'm going to show you." The muscle at his jaw tightened. "Tomorrow morning," he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. His wolf was still present in his eyes. Or rather, she felt it the way her own wolf felt it. The recognition still fresh and unsteady, neither of them pretending the last 10 minutes had not changed something. He turned and walked to the doorway, stopped with his back to her. "I'll put 2 guards at this door tonight, ones I assign personally." "All right." He left. She stood with the bag in both hands and listened to his steps descend the stairs. Her wolf held steady in her chest, present, turned in the direction he had gone. And the feeling was not what she had imagined in the rare moments she had allowed herself to imagine anything. It was more complicated. It carried the weight of everything still unresolved, everything still sitting folded at the bottom of the bag, everything that had not changed because the bond had finally closed. She sat on the cot and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They took longer than she would have liked. From somewhere in the lower levels of the fortress, she heard Soren's voice, calm and measured, asking one of the night guards what had occurred. She could not make out the full response. She did not need to. She set the bag carefully in her lap and stayed exactly where she was. Soren learned what he needed to know in 4 minutes. The guards had failed. The Omega was alive. Merrick had been present when she shifted, which meant he had seen the wolf she had been concealing for 6 weeks. Whether or not the bond recognition had occurred was information he did not yet have and needed quickly. He returned to his rooms, closed the door. He had spent 3 years building something careful and patient, placing pieces at distances that left no direct line back to him. A single Omega with a bag of herbs was not supposed to threaten any of it. She should have been in the east corridor before the 4th bell with nothing to say to anyone. He sat at his desk and opened the window. The cold came in off the stone walls. He had moved carefully for 3 years. The pieces he had avoided touching now required his hands directly. He began to calculate how much time he had left before morning. By dawn, Naya had not slept. She sat on the cot with the bag beside her and watched the thin line of light change at the edge of the window. The guards outside the door had changed twice. She knew by the footfalls and the brief exchange at the stairwell. Neither of the new men tried to speak to her. She preferred that. When the door opened after sunrise, Merrick came alone. He stopped just inside the threshold and looked at her, then at the bag beside her. His gaze flicked once to her shoulder, where the bruise had deepened overnight into a dark band beneath the collar of her dress. "You said you had something." "I do." She stood, picked up the bag, and crossed the room. He stepped back to let her pass. He did not take her to the council chamber. He led her instead to a smaller room off the western corridor, one she had never seen before. A narrow table, 2 chairs, a locked chest against the wall. No servants, no guards inside. He shut the door. Naya set the bag on the table and drew out the folded papers. She had handled them enough in the night that the creases were beginning to soften. She laid them in order. The dissolution order first, then Soren's field report, then the meeting record from Dunvale. Merrick did not touch them immediately. "Start at the beginning," he said. "I found them in the Dunvale archive." She kept her hands flat on the table so he would not see how much they wanted to curl. The campaign records for the region were stored there. These were in the dissolution files. He picked up the first page. She watched his eyes move across the lines, saw the point where he recognized his own seal. Then the second page. His expression changed there, not all at once, but in stages. The stillness came first, then the sharpened focus, then something harder. "The field report doesn't match the order," he said. "No." His eyes moved over the numbers again. 26 unresolved. "That is not dispersal." He looked up at her. "No." She touched the lower paragraph with one finger. "Read that again." He did. When he reached the line about the Alpha of Ashvale being neutralized by order of the general, he stopped. The room held very still around them. "You know what that means," she said. "It means Soren exceeded the order. It means he killed Bram before the operation began." The name landed between them and did not move. Merrick looked up slowly. "Bram, my mate." The silence after that was not empty. It had shape, weight. He looked at her face as if he were seeing a second version of it laid over the first, one that had been present all along and only now had a name attached to it. "You were Ashvale," he said. "Yes." He lowered his gaze to the papers again. She let him. There was nothing she could do for the process he had to move through now. He had to read the lines. He had to place himself where he belonged inside them. "When was this file made available to me?" he asked. "I don't know. I am asking myself, not you." He set the paper down with care that was almost violent in its restraint. He read the meeting record next. Lord Davin's name appeared twice. A territorial discussion. Rearrangement after unification. No details. Nothing that would stand alone as proof of conspiracy, but enough to draw a line. "Bram intercepted something," Naya said. "He would have had to. Soren would not kill him before the operation otherwise. Not if obedience would have solved the problem." Merrick's eyes lifted to her again, and this time there was no distance in them at all. "What else do you know?" "Only what is on those pages." "That is not what I asked." She held his gaze. He understood first. She saw it happen. "What else did Ashvale lose because of this?" he asked quietly. She looked at the papers, not at him. "More than you ordered. Less than Soren intended." His jaw tightened. He waited, but he did not ask again, and after a moment, she understood that he had changed the wording because he had decided not to take what she was not offering. He gathered the documents into a neat stack. "No one else has seen these?" "No." "Did anyone in Dunvale see you take them?" "The clerk saw me in the archive." "Nothing more." He nodded once. Then he moved to the door, opened it, and called for Captain Ivers. When the man arrived, Merrick handed him the stack. "No one enters my war room without my order," he said. "No one leaves the fortress gates without my order. Send for the records keeper, the Eastern Dispatch logs, and the last 3 years of border correspondence with Dunvale and the East Territory." Quietly. Ivers took the documents and left at once. Naya stayed where she was. Merrick closed the door again and turned back to her. The room seemed smaller now. "Soren ordered the men last night." "Yes." "You know that." "Yes." "How?" She met his eyes. "Because I came back from Dunvale with papers in my bag, and by the next week, 2 guards tried to kill me in a locked room." That earned the first visible break in him. Not loud, not dramatic. A small movement in the face of a man who had spent years disciplining every outward response into usefulness, and had for a second not managed it in time. "He has been beside me for 9 years, Merrick said. "I know." He looked away from her then, not from avoidance, but from thought, and crossed to the far side of the table. One hand braced on the wood, the other opened and closed once. "My order was dispersal," he said. "The Eastern holding was temporary detention until the packs could be reassigned. I signed a dissolution. I did not sign a slaughter." "No," she said. "You signed the door open. He chose what came through it." He lifted his head. That was the first time since she had known him that she saw something raw in his expression with no cover laid over it. Not directed at her, not even directed fully at Soren. At himself, perhaps. And what kind of king could sign a paper and never stand where it landed? I should have gone there, he said. Yes. The answer was immediate. He accepted it with the same stillness he had accepted the papers. A knock came at the door. Ivers again. Merrick opened it. The captain spoke in a low voice. Naya caught only fragments. Records keeper. 2 years of sealed dispatch bundles. Private mark used between Soren's office and Eastwatch. Merrick's face changed by degrees. Bring them, he said. The hours that followed moved quickly and with absolute quiet. Merrick kept Naya in the western room while documents came in and out. He read, cross-checked, sent for names, requested dispatch seals and route logs. Once, just before noon, he asked her to look at a copied page and identify whether the note in the margin was in the same hand as the Dunvale field report. She confirmed it was. By early afternoon, the line had become clear. 3 winters ago, during the campaign, Soren had opened a private channel with Lord Davin. Not a single agreement, but a series of messages. Territory promises. Guard movement reports delayed by hours or changed by one road. Information that meant little alone and much when accumulated. The plan had never been immediate. It had been patient. Build support in the east, shift loyalties in border outposts. Let Merrick rely more heavily on Soren's reports until the reports themselves became a scaffold around the throne. One dispatch, intercepted near Ashvale and noted only in shorthand, had disappeared from the official chain that same week. Bram had stopped a messenger. Soren had written the false justification for his death the next morning. Merrick read the final confirmation in silence. Then he sent for Soren. Soren entered the war room with his usual composure. He wore dark blue, gloves in one hand, the picture of a general interrupted in the middle of useful work. His eyes moved first to Merrick, then to Naya at the far wall, then to the open dispatches on the table. He understood immediately. Merrick, he said, what is this? Merrick did not answer the question. You ordered a kill in the North Tower last night. Soren's face did not change. I did not. You signed false field reports in Ashvale. Still nothing. No. Merrick lifted the page with the signature and placed it flat on the table. Then another. Then a dispatch strip marked with Soren's private seal and Lord Davin's return cipher. Try again. Soren's gaze dropped to the evidence. He was quiet for a long time, not weighing whether he had been caught. That was evident. Weighing instead which version of the truth might still be useful. When he looked up, the denial was gone. Ashvale was unstable, he said. That is not an answer. It is the answer. Bram had information he did not understand. He would have handed it to whichever side promised his people another week of safety. That kind of man was dangerous in wartime. Naya felt her hands go cold and still. Merrick did not raise his voice. So, you killed him before I arrived. I solved a problem before it grew teeth. You murdered an allied alpha under Crown order, falsified my campaign record, and spent 3 years building a second power structure with Davin. At the name, the smallest shift crossed Soren's face. There it was. Merrick saw it too. You should have acted sooner, Soren said. That is the truth of it. The throne centralized power, but you still governed as if the old loyalties would bend on command. I built what was needed in the gaps you left. You built treason. I built certainty. Merrick stepped around the table. The room changed with the movement. Naya had seen him fight only once, in the training yard below, long before Dunvale, when he corrected a captain's form with 2 fast strikes and no wasted motion. What stood in front of Soren now was not the man from the stool outside her cell. It was the Alpha King in Tyre, the part of him every corridor in Greywall had been arranged around. You will stand down, Merrick said. You will surrender your seal, your command writ, and the East Dispatch key. Soren smiled then. Barely. You think it stops here? Merrick did not. That was clear in his face 1 second before the horn sounded from the east wall. One blast, then another. Captain Ivers slammed the door open without permission. Riders at the lower gate, east banners. Davin's men are inside the outer yard. Soren moved for the side knife hidden in his boot. Merrick was faster. The knife never cleared leather. Merrick caught Soren's wrist, drove him into the map table, and twisted until the blade hit the floor. Ivers crossed the room with 2 guards on his heels and pinned Soren's other arm before he could recover. "Bind him," Merrick said. Then he looked at Naya. "Stay here." She almost laughed at that. Instead, she picked up the fallen knife and set it far out of reach. "I am not going anywhere," she said. He was gone before the last word left her mouth. The fight in the outer yard did not last long. Greywall had been built for siege, but this was not a siege. It was a rushed strike timed to land before Soren's exposure became formal accusation. Davin had sent men fast, not many. Enough to create confusion. Enough, perhaps, to kill Merrick in the disorder if the inside of the fortress had opened to meet them. It had not. From the war room window, Naya could see only pieces of it. Movement across the lower stones, the flash of steel, the gate team forcing the eastern riders into a narrowing channel between wall and stable, where numbers stopped mattering. She saw Merrick once in the middle of it, dark coat thrown back, sword arm clean and economical. Then the angle lost him. Behind her, Soren sat bound to a chair, one cheek bruising where it had struck the table. He watched the yard through the same window and said nothing. The silence around him had changed. It no longer felt measured. It felt spent. By dusk, it was over. Lord Davin was brought in alive, with blood on his sleeve and mud to the knee. Merrick ordered both men held separately until morning. Then he did something Naya had not expected. He called judgment publicly. Greywall's central yard filled before sunrise. Guards lined the walls. Soldiers from every barrack stood in ordered rows. Servants clustered at the edges where they thought nobody would notice them. The platform used for formal decrees had been brought out and set beside the well. Naya stood beneath the shadow of the western arch, not hidden, not displayed. Merrick had not asked her to appear. He had not asked her not to. Soren was brought out first, Davin after him. The charges were read plainly: treason against the crown, falsification of royal orders, murder under the protection of campaign authority, conspiracy with external forces to destabilize the throne. No embellishment, no dramatics. When asked for answer, Soren gave none. Davin tried indignation first, then insult, then silence when neither changed anything. Merrick stood above them and listened as if he had all the time in the world. When the reading ended, he looked to Soren. "You used my authority to bury your own ambition under the bodies of people who trusted crown law to mean what it said. You do not speak for this throne. You do not stand beneath its protection." He looked to Davin next. "You tied your future to a traitor and rode against Greywall before dawn. You chose your side. The sentence was removal of title, lands, and command, pending final disposition by the Territorial Council. Immediate imprisonment under Crown seal. Public disgrace first, the rest later. It was not mercy. It was structure. The guards took them away. Only when the yard began to empty did Merrick come down from the platform. He crossed the stones toward the western arch and stopped in front of Naya. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I have had Ashvale's surviving names requested from every resettlement ledger still standing. If any of your people lived through the dispersal, I will find where they were sent." She looked at him. He had not promised repair. He had not asked anything from her in return. The offer stood on its own shape. "Thank you," she said. His gaze held hers. The bond sat between them now with no distance left in it. Not soft, not easy. A steady pull under the skin. Her wolf turned toward him with the calm certainty it had withheld from the rest of the world for 3 years. She felt his response in the line of his shoulders, in the way he stopped one step nearer than courtesy required and did not move back. "I did not know about the child," he said quietly. The world narrowed. She had never told him. Not in words. Not directly. Then she remembered the morning in the western room. More than you ordered, less than Soren intended. Understanding had gone the rest of the distance on its own. "No," she said. "You didn't." He did not say he was sorry. It would have been too small. She was grateful for that. The yard behind them had nearly emptied. Wind moved across the open stone and lifted the edge of his coat. Somewhere above, a raven crossed from tower to tower. "I can have rooms prepared outside the north tower," he said. "Or I can have you escorted to the lower gate and supplied for the road." The choice, real and spoken aloud. Naya looked past him at Greywall's walls, at the training yard where soldiers were already returning to routine, at the well beside the platform, at the place where yesterday's life had cracked open and shown its true frame. Then she looked at him again. 3 years ago, she had run through a burning wood, with blood down her legs and smoke in her throat, and a future tearing apart faster than she could hold it. She had spent every day since moving from one temporary shelter to the next, surviving by skill and habit and refusal. Nothing in her had planned farther than the next road. Now her wolf lived in her chest again, not as absence, not as memory, as presence, warm, awake, watching. "I'll stay," she said. Something in his face changed, small and unguarded. Then it settled. "Not in the North Tower," he said. "No." He almost smiled at that. They walked back toward the western corridor together, not touching, not speaking. The bond moved with them anyway, a new weight both of them carried openly now. At the foot of the stair, Naya glanced once toward the eastern wall where the first light had fully reached the stone. The grief remained. Bram remained. The child remained. None of it had been erased by justice or by the man walking beside her. It had simply stopped being the only thing inside her. For the first time in 3 years, when she looked ahead, she did not see only distance. The end. Here's the closing in Lily's style, adapted for Moonlight Novels. And that is where we leave Naya and Merrick, not at a perfect ending, but at a beginning that cost them both something real to reach. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and leave a comment telling me which moment got to you the most. I read every single one. Subscribe to Moonlight Novels so you never miss a new story. New uploads every week, and there is always something good coming next. I will see you in the next one.